solo her!
Souls-likes. A genre I'm not going to keep doing this whole video with this shit on my head. 1 second. Souls-likes. A genre that I feel in today's day and age really is something that I don't think needs any sort of introduction. And if it somehow still does, I would suggest getting out from under that rock before you contract a Mesozoic era disease. But for in case that probably happens, let me fill you in on the details. You see, there was this company called From Software, and in 2009, they decided, let's release Peak. And in 2011, they decided to do it again, and the rest is history. Who'd have thought that releasing Peak twice would lead to success? Hey, Ubisoft. And because of the momentous success of Dark Souls, its popularity ended up spinning off into its own subgenre, and that brings us to today, where it feels like everybody and their estranged cousin seems to be pumping out title after title after title, capitalizing on what From Software created all those years ago. But what if I was to tell you that FromSoft wasn't the people who started it? Now that statement might be a tad bit bizarre because Demon's Souls was kind of the catalyst that started out this subgenre. And you would be correct, but over 50 years of video game history would like to have a word with you. Now I do understand I sound like some Nimrod that just ended up spouting some incoherent gibberish, and if you did end up thinking something like that, that's very insensitive of you. But much like any game or any sense of media that comes out nowadays, it had to get its inspiration somewhere, right? And I definitely don't think that even the genre of Souls-likes is the exception, as we're going to see in this video. Because in this video, I decided to do something I don't think many people have really done before, and that's to take a deep dive into what actually could have been the original Souls-like. And before I come off like some pretentious asshole, I'm not really the first person to do a deep dive on a topic like this, because a lot of games that I decided to use for this video came from doing a lot, and I mean a lot of research. I'm talking blogs, Iron Pineapple videos, random YouTube videos, Wikipedia articles, games from memory. There was a lot of things that I needed to take a look at in order to do this video properly. Now you see, where other channels I looked up merely showcased or talked about these games in the sense of how much Souls fans will enjoy these experiences if they choose to go back, I decided to make myself stand out. I ranked each of these entries based on how scarily close they are to what we have in terms of a modern day Souls-like. And let me tell you, ladies and longs, we've got a bunch to go through. So let's fire this motherfucker up with our very first entry. And to do that, we need to jump back all the way to 1987. Yes, ladies and longs, we finally made it. I am now finally a Nintendo YouTuber. Time for me to shill for this company so they can copyright strike me in the future. Now you might be wondering to yourself, how on earth does Zelda 2 of all games have any similarities to Dark Souls? And my answer to that would be, I don't actually know either, but one of the articles I looked up had this game listed, so that's more than good enough for me. And I mean, come on, I'm pretty sure Zelda served as an inspiration to Dark Souls in one way or another, right? Elvish twink excluded. But hey, I'm up for a little bit of a history lesson, and I've never actually played Zelda 2 before. But I heard from a lot of people it is probably the hardest game in the series, so hey, why not? But I do find this game quite extremely confusing. And what I mean by that is that the full game's name is called Zelda 2: The Adventure of Link, but still it asks you to register a name. So I called him Lump. Zelda 2: The Adventures of Lump. And from what I've seen on videos about this game, is that it kind of plays more like a traditional RPG in the vein of games like Final Fantasy. We have this overworld to explore with random encounters where the gameplay shifts, and instead of it being turn-based, it's real-time. So I think you can kind of see how From Software looked at this and was like, yeah, I want that. Also, throughout the game, you have these little villages you're able to explore with a bunch of NPCs with all of their own unique little things to say, like asking a random woman a question and her apologizing by saying, "Sorry, I know nothing. Is this why you weren't allowed to vote?" Or hey, you can find one of the most iconic lines in retro gaming by going to this guy over here and him saying, "Hello, my name is Error." "Hi, Error. I'm Syntax." Hell, you can even find certain NPCs that can fully heal you if you find yourself in deep shit from getting attacked in dark caves, where you cannot for the life of you see shit. Lump is so skinny, even the air seems to be able to kick the shit out of them. And the way how they heal you is Brothels. Yeah, this is probably stretching the idea of it being a Souls-like, but I enjoy being inclusive in my videos, so whomever added Zelda 2 on the list of games before Dark Souls, this is for you, I suppose. But hey, for the sake of pacing, you'll either be extremely happy or distressed to hear that we're already done with the NES section. Yeah, there were really no other games to my knowledge that came out during the NES era that people classified as being the OG Souls-like. So with that out of the way, this game will probably score a good 4 out of 10 based on how similar it is to Dark Souls. Am I going to give a further elaboration to this score? No. But with all of that out of the way, let's jump up a console generation, shall we? Now here we're starting to breach the territory of what could be considered the OG Souls-like. And it starts with the name. Soul Blazer? Huh? Already Miyazaki must have been taking notes. But what I find funny with Soul Blazer, it's probably more of a Zelda game than our last entry because it's a top-down dungeon crawler where you run around killing enemies to progress even further, and the way you combat these enemies are either by beating the shit out of them with your sword or using magic abilities from souls you're able to find during the game. So once again, there's soul in the name, you gather souls. These jokes practically write themselves. Anyway, I'm not too sure what the whole premise is with Soul Blazer, but it seems like you go from the starting area where you respawn once you die, go out into this overworld where at the start of the game there isn't much here, then you head out to this cave area where most of the cool shit happened during my session, and by standing on these pads over here, you populate the overworld with a bunch of NPCs, or as the game calls them, creatures. I'm pretty sure a shop owner would find that insensitive. Some of them even serve gameplay purposes like unlocking more of the cave for you to explore or give you healing herbs. Now, you gotta think about this. Did this game end up inspiring Dark Souls? Or Resident Evil? I mean, you could get weed in Demon Souls, so I suppose that makes the most sense. And that's mainly what I was able to deduce about the game. It's a pretty standard RPG for the time, and it's still pretty fun. But all jokes aside, I did notice a funny thing about the game's combat, which could actually have a relation to Dark Souls in some funny way. You see, by holding down one of the shoulder buttons, you're able to lock your character in place with his sword outstretched, and most enemies that ends up touching the blade will get damaged. So, almost in a way you can see this as the precursor to Dark Souls' lock-on, as well as a checkpoint that you can find in the dungeon that can teleport you back to the overworld. You could have actually unironically seen this as a precursor to bonfires, eh? Hey? So with all of that, I think Soul Blazer should score a probably, give or take, maybe a 5 out of 10 in terms of its similarity to Dark Souls. But once again, much like our last entry, out of every game on the SNES, this was the only game I managed to find when people talked about what could be considered the origins of Souls-likes. But that's not a problem for me personally, because that now means we can finally jump from sprites onwards to polygons, because now we're gonna see what my favorite console of all time was able to cook up. And hey, I even prepared something special for this occasion.
Okay, this feels really weird, but I like it. Where was I?
You remember Tunic? You know, that cutesy Souls-like Zelda game from 2022. That game that blended beautiful visuals, deep combat for what it was, and one of the most unique methods of world building I think I've ever seen in any game. Well, what if I was to tell you that this game was a ripoff because Kingsley Adventure did the whole Fox Souls-like thing back when I was a single digit old? Yeah, that's right. I'm about to spark some internet drama over an Indian PS1 game because my life is just that empty that the slightest bit of conflict amuses me. In Kingsley's Adventure, you play as this little fox called Kingsley. It's almost like the game's title already gave that away. And besides being a character who Twitter artists will discover in the next 15 years and destroy his innocence, Kingsley really wants to be a knight and take down the big naughty of this game's universe, Bad Custard. Yeah, this game, for whatever reason, has an entire food theme when it comes to its characters and locations. I mean, the Fruit Kingdom, Carrot Kingdom, Bad Custard. I guess this location I'm running around in must be called the Diabetic Dungeon. But regardless, now that we've jumped from the SNES to the PS1, the Souls-like similarities might become a lot more apparent because now we've got an entire Z-axis to work with. And yeah, we can kind of start seeing stuff like knowing when to block an attack in order to kick the shit out of enemies, and the satisfying nature of that entire song and dance is very prominent in Kingsley's Adventure. We even get a crossbow that we're able to take out range threats similarly to how it was handled in Dark Souls. But let's get down to brass tacks real quick. Besides those slight similarities to Dark Souls, Kingsley's adventure feels a little bit more in line with something like the original Tomb Raider. Because a recurring staple we're going to be seeing in this era of gaming is that we got a 3D platformer with tank controls. Because what goes well with being a cartoon fox going on a grand adventure? Big tits and guns! Hell, I'm pretty sure when I showed off the crossbow, you noticed it, right? Even the menus are just a straight rip from Tomb Raider. But yeah, excluding the combat, it does feature a lot of the kinds of stuff that you would expect from 90s Tomb Raiders, minus the cleavage. You'll be exploring dungeons, doing basic platforming you'd come to expect from a game in this style, flipping switches, moving big-ass blocks. The only difference is you can't go apeshit and blast everything with infinite ammo pistols that would put the Geneva Convention to shame. Instead, now we have a more slower and methodical approach to its combat with the aforementioned blocking and melee attacking, which is why I brought up the Souls comparison. And aside from all of that, this game still follows the tried and true formula of kicking the shit out of enemies, kicking spiders more specifically, going to these varied locales and talking to a plethora of NPCs that all have their own unique dialogue, which can either be important to the overall story, or funnier things like this one guy who got stood up on a date and is incapable of taking the hint. Even Kingsley thinks that this dude is desperate. But yeah, I can say without a doubt that aside from the more Tomb Raider approach to the overall gameplay, I can see how From Software looked at this game's combat and said, I like this, but it's just missing some. Therefore, Kingsley's adventure scores a 6 out of 10 in terms of similarities to Dark Souls. I see these rankings are gonna cause somebody to get an aneurysm. Ian Livingstone's Deathtrap Dungeon is probably the most pretentious game on this list because it presents itself like a fantasy novel you'd find at Bargain Books. In that case, once this video is over, I'll happily start work on my published work, Mr. Long's Guide on How to Successfully Avoid Paying Tax. Anyway, Deathtrap Dungeon is probably the most progressive game in this entire list so far, because out of all of the games I've just looked at, you can play as a man, or a woman. So Deathtrap Dungeon you can almost probably see as a more edgified version of Kingsley's adventure, because this game decided to listen a little bit too much Ghost. Because much like the last entry, it's more of a dark fantasy twist on the formula established by games like Tomb Raider, except this time we get to play as a dude with a nice ass. But when it comes down to the game itself, I can definitely see in terms of the overall atmosphere and vibes that this game gives off, it's probably the closest game we've had so far when it comes to how well it captures what Dark Souls would do with its dark fantasy setting. And I'm just gonna tell you something that made me real sad with this game. When I was playing each of these games for this video, I had so much analytics I needed to keep in mind when considering what is Souls-like worthy or not. I could practically game the stock market. And when I got to the combat of this game, it felt as good as you'd hope. But my disappointment quickly arose when I realized that this tiny red bar up here wasn't a stamina bar, but a fucking speedometer. Had they just substituted that with the stamina bar, I think we would have gotten a little bit closer into Souls-like territory. But when it comes down to the game's combat, it's your basic hack and slash affair where you get to take on blue Oompa Loompas and some orcs either by using your sword or finding magical items scattered throughout the stages, something that you could probably see could have inspired Dark Souls' own use of magic items. But just to gush about something real quick that this game does that I really like for a game on the PlayStation 1 specifically, it has this dismemberment mechanic that just adds that one tiny bit more satisfaction to the game's combat, where otherwise it would have probably felt a little bit more floaty. I really like this, and I really think that's cool that a PS1 game was able to innovate like this. All in all, I really like this game, and we're actually finally starting to see some semblance of what could have led to the inspiration to something like Dark Souls in the future. So I'll give Deathtrap Dungeon a 7 out of 10 for similarities to Dark Souls. Now here we've got ourselves a pretty interesting case, because not only is it a game that is featured in this video, but it's the only game that's based on a TV show on this entire list. And it's this, Xena Warrior Princess, which aired from 1995 to 2001. And I can't really remember on which list I saw this, but hey, it was on one of them, and I doubt I would have put this game here for any other reason, and after playing it for myself, I can see somewhat how this game could have played an inspiration for not only Dark Souls, but funnily enough, hack hack and slash games in the modern day. Now, how does this game feel like a Souls-like? Easy. It's probably the first game that we've looked at that gives you a proper dodge ability. I mean, it's pretty shit, but hey, I'm sure it gave incels at the time the same feeling of happiness back then as most men who ended up playing Metal Gear Solid 2 with the cartwheeling naked Raiden. But why I say this game could have inspired a shit ton of hack and slash games is that the game's combat feels scarily modern despite it being a game that came out in 1999, because the flow of the combat with the different attacks you're able to do, like the aforementioned dodging, different combos you can pull off, feels scarily similar to modern games like God of War 2005 and other action games that we got during the 2000s and 2010s. So that was definitely a treat to see. Hell, this is also probably one of the only games from this era I can think of that has a controllable throwing weapon akin to something like the remote-controlled batarangs from the Arkham games. This is really scary in that regard, but I think it adds even more credence that I think that this game could have inspired Dark Souls in its own certain way, because I'm pretty sure that Dark Souls did take a look at a lot of games that released like this in the past and yoinked elements out of it to build what we know about today. So for that, I'm just gonna have to give Xena Warrior Princess, like, give or take, maybe a 6.5 out of 10 in terms of similarity to Dark Souls. I would have probably scored it a lot higher if we had to compare it to modern-day character action games. Now, once again, we've got an extremely interesting case. Rising Zan Samurai Gunman does contain elements that can be seen as earlier elements of stuff that were implemented in Souls-like, for example, a lock-on system. Nice sneeze. But this game, as I'm sure you could probably just see for yourself, is literally more in line with something like Devil May Cry. I mean, come on. We have a charismatic protagonist that uses both a gun and a sword. They both wear red. That's it. I mean, this game is also incredibly gory. It has its own rage mode type thing that causes you to do increased damage with both your melee and ranged weapons, and the game is extremely stylized, with its inspiration clearly lying in both Western and Japanese culture, where it takes a lot of inspiration probably from animes that were out during the time like Cowboy Bebop. Shit, dude, this game not only probably influenced some elements that were later used in something like the Souls-like genre, but I'm 100% certain that this game had to serve as some inspiration for Devil May Cry. And this is more in line when I'm talking about something when it comes to how scary the similarities are back then to what we have now. You could have told me that this was a prototype DMC and I probably would have believed you. Or not, because it's not a good idea to trust strangers on the internet, but this would be a very rare exception. This game is definitely something that I feel needs a standalone video on its own in the future, but for now, when it comes to how closely it resembles something like Dark Souls, let's give it a 5 out of 10. Now, something you may have noticed is that these games were not in any particular chronological order, and I have kind of been edging everybody with a couple of games that we still have left for this section, but I feel that they fit the bill of inspiring modern-day Souls-like so well that I didn't just want to spoil them way too soon. So that's why I decided to leave these final two franchises for last. So let's start off with... Now, if you're in any way a PlayStation lore scholar, or a Cadicarus fan if you want to be more pedantic...
Maybe that's what Lee Harvey Oswald was looking for. The other guy just got in the way.
Then I'm pretty sure that Nightmare Creatures might actually be the most iconic game on this list for one particular reason. But before I get to what that is, Nightmare Creatures I think probably is the best game you can use as an example as to where Souls-likes could have been inspired. It's got an extremely dark atmosphere, the enemies are grotesque, the female character is way too underdressed for this type of environment, but we'll leave it like this because we need to keep the male audience gawking at the screen like this is a precursor to Subway Surfers. That's not really a good example, I apologize. Knowing when to dodge, attack, block, finding items that serves both as offensive and healing items, so many of these little elements in this game serves as the building blocks which Souls-likes would use to build its foundation. Oh, and like Deathtrap Dungeon, it still has a pretty in-depth dismemberment system, where sometimes enemies, even after losing their limbs, they will still try to fight back, and for a game that's this old, that's pretty cool to see. Now, what is the one thing about this game, besides what I've just mentioned, serves as one of the most iconic things that 100% could have inspired Souls-likes in the future? Well, I mean, when it comes down to Nightmare Creatures, it's got a grimdark atmosphere, grotesque creatures, and the fact that it takes place during 1800s London. meaning Victorian London, meaning that families were starving. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if 2015's Bloodborne took mega inspiration from Nightmare Creatures to craft Yharnam. And looking back at this game in hindsight, it's really scary to see how close these two games are in terms of similarities. And I'd argue for the sequel, Nightmare Creatures 2, it's even more so. Because whereas the original game has a lot of what would eventually lead up to what we know Bloodborne for, it still at its core is a stage-by-stage arcade beat-em-up game, with a little bit more depth to its combat where you need to put a little bit more thought into it and not just beat the shit out of everything you see. But in Nightmare Creatures 2's case, I think in terms of everything like its difficulty, pacing, and even the game's atmosphere, I think it's way more in line with Bloodborne than even the first game, because it's more slower, there's almost close to zero music, combat encounters are mainly one-on-one, making you feel like every single enemy is a potential threat, and this is one of the first games, to my knowledge any case, to have 3D rendered naked tits. Yes, this monster over here was getting all freaky before the 34th rule was even set in stone. So if you're into that kind of shit, lads, here's a new model for you to supplement with your lotion and tissues. Now there's a few things wrong, I would say, with Nightmare Creatures 2. It's a very stripped back game in comparison to the first game when it comes down to the stuff like items you're able to pick up, even more variety to the combat, but still, I think this game differentiates itself enough with both its combat and exploration, especially the atmosphere. I think it really more than makes up for it. Hell, this is also one of the first few games, to my knowledge, that has execution moves after weakening an enemy enough, aptly named fatalities. Not sure how they got away with that one, but it's still pretty damn cool to see a PS1 game of all things is where mechanics like these got its start. So with all of that in mind, I think that in terms of similarity to Dark Souls, Nightmare Creatures 1 gets an 8 out of 10, and Nightmare Creatures 2, I feel, gets a 9 out of 10 for how scarily similar they are to Dark Souls. Now, I'm not going to egg you on with this entry like Nightmare Creatures, because these games are also pretty apparent to what they ended up inspiring down the line. And yeah, aside from the more down-to-earth style for its setting, Tenchu 1 and Tenchu 2 primarily served as the basis that would later down the line end up inspiring Sekiro. So that's 2 for 2, where seemingly two forgotten PS1 games ended up serving as massive inspirations to two of the most iconic games that we have today. But I do understand that at face value, me just saying that it had an influence on Souls-like isn't just gonna cut it by me saying that these games influence Sekiro. So what do you actually do here? Well, it's pretty simple. You get to pick between two samurais that, outside of the catering to both sexual attractions, pretty much play the exact same way. But the core gameplay of Tenchu is being dropped into these environments, tackling how you want to approach each of the game's objectives by either sneaking or killing off every single enemy in any way how you see fit. And before each mission, you're able to take certain items that can be used to heal you, serve as different ways to combat the enemies, or just to assist you with stealth. You even have this nifty little grappling hook that adds a lot more verticality to the stages and gives you even more opportunities for sneaking or going on the offensive. And obviously, a grappling hook being utilized this early on, how can you not tell me that this is something similar to Sekiro? Another thing that this game does that could have had a massive influence on the designs of Souls-likes is that it's fucking hard. I couldn't even really beat the first stage because I give up way too easily and I have other things to do. But after reaching Asian EDP, I get fucking cut down by this dude who lacks basic self-awareness.
So much for your big mouth.
Yeah, I'm the one with the big mouth fish lips. And then you realize, when you fuck up, every single item that you took into the stage doesn't reset, meaning you're left with jack shit if you choose to try again. So yippee! Tenchu 2, I think, does slightly better in terms of its controls because you can beat old people. I mean, because now you actually have a proper dodge that you can use, and a tutorial that I got stuck on. But besides that, one slight blemish, once I actually got down to killing some enemies, I can definitely tell you that in terms of the game's combat, I think it would have been 100% more improved than it was in the original game. But I sadly didn't get past this tutorial because I got lost and I didn't know how to progress any further, so until I get some more time, I feel like if this game does exactly what the first game did, with the addition of the vastly more improved controls, I have no doubt that I'm probably equally gonna have as much fun with this game as I did with the first one, if not more so. So with that out of the way, Tenchu 1 gets an 8 out of 10 for similarity to Dark Souls, and Tenchu 2 just on the basis that it has more improved controls, I'll give that an 8.5. But now I hear you thinking, Actually, I can't hear shit because this is a pre-recorded video, meaning that you just answered a glorified MP4 file like you think you were watching Dora. She isn't real. We've spent a significant amount of time on the PS1. How many more games on the system could have served a significant inspiration to Souls-likes? None. You can leave now and never come back. But for the three of you who decided to stay, yes, that marks the ending of the PS1 section of this video. There's probably a lot more I'm missing out on, but from what my research led me to, these were the only games I was able to find that somewhat resembled what Souls-like would eventually end up coming later down the line. But now, I think it's time to address the massive elephant in the room. Now, we know this entire video is about Souls-likes, correct? And I do 100% understand that if we're talking about what essentially serves as the original Souls-like, we can't go without talking about FromSoft's original creation, King's Field. But I can, so cry about it. All jokes aside, yes, King's Field is without a doubt the origins of the Souls-like formula down to the T, aside from the fact that this is a first-person game instead of third-person. But for this video, I just really wanted to focus on games that could have served an inspiration to not only Dark Souls, but the entire genre of Souls-likes, and I really feel that games like King's Field and Shadow Tower would just be grasping at low-hanging fruit. As another example of what I'm trying to avoid, I really hate the idea when people label games like Bloodborne and Sekiro and Elden Ring as Souls-likes. Whilst yes, you're not wrong, I feel that label should be reserved for games that make use of the formula and not use that label with the people who, you know, created the formula to begin with. And I understand that's probably just me, but that's truly how I feel when addressing Souls-likes. So for this video any case, games like King's Field probably won't be showing up on this list, but maybe for a future video though. But now that we've waded through the pixelated fields of the PS1, it's time for us to once again jump up another generation. And for our next games, let's start off with... I understand that this is a recurring catchphrase for this video, but once again, we've got ourselves a pretty interesting pair of games here. Maximo Ghosts to Glory and Maximo the Army of Xen are games developed by Capcom of all people. And not only do they contain some of the aspects that FromSoft would later use for their games, albeit a bit more fucked up in terms of its visuals, but Maximo serves as a spiritual successor to Capcom's side-scroller series Ghosts and Goblins, starring Arthur, that I think more people would know from Marvel vs. Capcom rather from his own game, and truth be told, the modern landscape of people who know anything about Ghosts and Goblins is too busy drawing genitals on Firebrand. So that was kind of an interesting piece of trivia to learn. And much like Ghosts and Goblins, Maximo is pretty much left in the ditches of the game franchises that probably will never sadly come back. Although, knowing Capcom of all people nowadays, there might still be a chance for this series to probably make a resurgence, and that makes me quite excited now that Dark Souls is an established series. But regardless, Maximo is a 3D platformer hack-and-slash game that's apparently pretty well known for its high difficulty. In Maximo, you'll be finding yourself traversing from stage to stage, taking out enemies in once again a similar fashion to the games of this style before, you know, beating the shit out of enemies with your sword, blocking with your shield, and as you progress through each of the stages, you're able to pick up coins that can be used to purchase certain items. I never ended up doing this because I think the fact that communism in this type of climate is bullshit when I'm just trying to save the world, so I should be entitled to anything that my heart desires. Find armor to increase your overall health, unless you like the idea of Maximo just running around in his underwear. I mean, you do you, I suppose. And unlocking newer abilities to enhance the overall gameplay, like unlocking newer moves and shit. And from what I've played, this game kicks a lot of ass. And since we've now moved up to the PS2, the game looks great and the combat feels equally just as smooth, and the controls for platforming were even smoother. And when we move over to Maximo the Army of Xen, this game just takes every single thing that was so good to begin with the original game and just made it better, like most sequels should be doing. And hell, I'd even say that Maximo 2 is just better on the ground, that you're actually able to beat the shit out of the NPCs because the main villain shouldn't be the one you're worried about, it's I really had a lot of fun for the short amount of time that I played this, and I really do think in the future I would really like to make some videos on Maximo itself, so let me know what you guys think about that kind of idea in the comments below. So with all that out of the way, the rankings goes as followed. Maximo Ghosts and Glory I think can get a nice 6 out of 10 in terms of its similarity to Dark Souls, and Maximo 2, The Army of Xen, gets a 7.5 on the basis that it's the same game except it's improved. So yeah, good job I guess. Shinobido The Way of the Ninja was a game that I haven't considered adding until I remember, I think it was my brother that owned this game, and figured since hey, I talked about Tenchu, why not add it here for this video? And to my surprise, yeah, Shinobido has a lot of aspects I'm looking for when talking about Souls-likes, and once again, even Sekiro, because now we have a proper lock-on, we've got some dodge rolls, we've got some satisfying combat, and we even have a sprint where we can trip over the corpses of the people we just killed. That probably inspired Smash Bros. Brawl. And once again, we've got consumable items that we can use like shurikens, a grappling hook, and even healing items. So this game, for something that I wasn't even intending on adding to this list, surprisingly checks off all of the boxes of having stuff that would have ended up inspiring what Souls-likes would end up using. And once again, this was just a surprise add-on that I just figured, hey, why not? Now, I didn't really end up playing too much of this game because would you believe that having our second mission being an escort mission, where the escort in question is carrying a heavy as shit box that limits what we're able to do, and then I ended up falling down a hole. That didn't really go off with me. But in time, I am really eager to see what else this game's got to offer because I'm really intrigued. So for that, I think Shinobido gets an 8 out of 10 when it comes down to how much it inspired the Souls-likes in the future. Knights of the Temple Infernal Crusade is a game that has a name with a length that is enough to make me sweat. And surprisingly enough, this game was developed by Starbreeze before they were best known as my cash cows in 2023. And this is honestly a game that really frustrates me because with its visuals, the fact that you're playing as a knight and the overall vibes the game has, it's just missing a fucking dodge roll and a stamina bar, and then I can already see this game sitting uncomfortably close to Dark Souls with the caveat of it having a little bit more of a grounded setting. This could essentially have been like the Kingdom Come Deliverance for Dark Souls, if you catch my drift. But what we have here anyway is a pretty damn fun hack and slash combat game that somewhat feels more like a clone of Resident Evil rather than a Souls-like, because it's just exploring these castle hallways, catacombs and stuff like that, completing puzzles and not trying to get your throat slit by the enemies that actually can dodge roll. Why the hell must you tease me like this, game? This game kind of pulled me in, not just because people showcase this game as a potential inspiration for Dark Souls, but because I really miss hack and slash games that were more in line with early Devil May Cry and the early God of War games. And it's pretty interesting to think that the same company that released one of the worst games I think I've ever played in my entire life had this as one of their earliest games they've ever developed. Yet, I don't see nearly as many people mentioning this game, so who knows? Maybe I'll keep this game in mind for a different video. But for now, how it stacks up when it comes down to how much it served as an inspiration to Dark Souls, I think Knights of the Temple Infernal Crusade, I'll happily give this a ranking of 7 out of 10. Now, once again, this game primarily serves as an honorable mention because when it comes down to Monster Hunter, I'm not sure why a bunch of people don't really bring this game up when the topic of Souls-like comes into discussion. Maybe it's because they're as bitter as me about Dino Crisis. But still, when it comes down to a game that has gameplay similar to a Souls-like, not a lot of people seem to bring up the fact that Monster Hunter kinda has a lot in common with Dark Souls from a base gameplay perspective. I mean, the game has an emphasis on more slower and methodical combat. It has a ton of depth in terms of its gameplay, with you needing to sharpen your weapons to utilize them to the absolute best effectiveness. You have a dodge roll that consumes stamina. You have a shit ton of items that can either heal you or buff you in certain ways. And the whole idea of killing these massive behemoths to craft better armor and weapons from them? Hell yeah! That's kick-ass, and I don't see why people don't really compare something like Monster Hunter more closely to Dark Souls. And for this video, I decided to try out Monster Hunter's original game that launched all the way back in 2005. And I have to say that everything you know and love about Monster Hunter nowadays, as few as there should be, is here and accounted for. Except now, I also really hope you like Metal Gear Rising because all the attacks are mapped to your right stick, meaning that the only way how I was able to play this game without feeling the need to paint the rooms with the copious amounts of battery acid I chug daily, aka Reboost Energy, please sponsor me, if not for the love of the game but because I like money, was to keep recentering the camera in order to not lose sight of what I was busy beating the shit out of. It was really interesting to see how not only Monster Hunter itself killed Dino Crisis, inspired Dark Souls, but how many of the franchise's core features all got its start all the way back in 2005. But yeah, I guess with all of that in mind, the OG Monster Hunter probably has to get a score of like 8.5 out of 10 in terms of how similar it is to something like Dark Souls. Now, my ladies and longs, we are finally at the final 3 games of this entire video. And before we go over to what those 3 games are, I would just like to give you guys a massive thank you for watching this video all the way up until now. It really means a lot to me. And I'm just gonna do my simple call to action thing where I get to say the stuff like, hey, could you please like and subscribe? Did the subscribe thing glow at the bottom left? And I'm mainly just stretching this section out just for that because of my own morbid curiosity, so I hope I get the glowy subscribe thing because I need to say it over and over again. Subscribe, subscribe, glow! And if you want to support me making more of these silly kinds of videos in the future, then you're more than welcome to do so by either becoming a channel member or joining the Patreon. It really means a lot to me, and I really enjoy making these kinds of videos and maybe delving a little bit more in the history of something that you really didn't know probably had its origins started someplace else. But with all that out of the way, give me money and enjoy the rest of the video. So I'll see you guys at the end. Now, this game should serve as a bit of a social experiment. If you just wojacked at your screen because you remembered Neopets, then please let me know in the comments below, because the feeling with me isn't mutual. Yes, I've always heard that name before, and I've always seen this puzzle game on the Wii many moons ago, but I can't really say that I've ever really been too engaged in Neopets like most people were. And just from taking a gander at the game's website, it turns out it's a virtual pet game much like Tamagotchi. And whilst I didn't play many of it, because would you believe I don't feel like giving my credentials to the woke mind virus, I did take a look at the various characters that are established in this world, as well as some of the creatures. And yeah, I can definitely see how some of these designs incentivize you into creating your first E621 account, but by the looks of it, the game itself isn't really all that active anymore like it used to be. But it still seems to live on through a dedicated community of people making some videos on it on YouTube, and I mean, that's great to see. But with anything that has popularity, there must come adaptation. And by the looks of it, one of the most iconic adaptations of this IP was Neopets The Darkest Faerie, releasing on the PS2 back in 2005, probably making this the most recent game on this entire video. And hey, happy 20th anniversary, Darkest Faerie. I'm sorry, I'm the person who needs to give you this introduction because I'm probably about to rip you a new one. Now, The Darkest Faerie and I have a little bit of history, but it's not that deep. You don't have to really think about this section as being the length of a Kojima cutscene. This was one of the games I remember seeing on one of Iron Pineapple's videos not too while ago, and that inclusion in his video is what made me consider it for a video like this. And I actually have a friend who's played this when she was younger, so I kind of feel like I have a double responsibility with this entry, to actually see how it stacks up when it comes to inspiring Dark Souls, and to ruin happy childhood memories with offensive humor. But in this game, you play as Tor, someone's OC that also shares the same name as a browser where you can buy illicit substances or end up on a watch list. And much like Kingsley's adventure, Tor really wants to become a knight. And how does the story start off? With him beating his little sister. And after doing some menial tasks around the farm, like gathering up some cattle, a mini-game style that would later be ripped off in Red Dead Redemption 1, and then helping your dad fix a water pump by risking your life by climbing on top of the barn roof and probably breaking both of your legs by jumping off of it, you're then given the task of delivering a message to the game's capital of Mirrodel. But not until after we take this sword that our father gives us for some protection. And once we acquire the sword, we smash up all the pottery in the house, leaving our family that's probably busy considering putting us up for adoption and embarking on our epic journey. Now, once again, this game follows the formula of exploring this open world, talking to NPCs, kicking the shit of people who look at us funny, and completing quests in order to advance the story. And let me tell you, this game isn't something that I grew up with, but I can definitely see why so many people love this game. It's just a simple, fun action-adventure platformer with a sense of whimsy that contrasts to what it would end up inspiring. But it also has a lot more depth to its gameplay that makes it pretty interesting for what it actually is. Now, when it comes to the game's combat, it's pretty much what we've discussed before. This rock, paper, scissors game of learning the enemy patterns, knowing when to block, dodge, even though you don't have a proper dodge ability, and when to attack. And you have a bunch of varied kinds of attack based on how fast or slow you mash the attack button, almost like Devil May Cry. But where the depth comes from in this game is by gathering these special materials called motes, each having their own elemental attribute that you can equip to either your armor, sword or your shield to give you certain buffs. I have fuck all idea what these buffs are, besides the fact that equipping a mode to your armor mitigates the amount of damage that you receive, but when it comes to your sword and shield, I have absolutely no idea. Maybe there's a damage buff, maybe equipping it to your shield is a defense mechanism to keep this furry fuck from getting used in Twitter art, but as we all know, that's never going to work. But hey, it's nice to know that this feature is something that's implemented, and it gives some much needed depth for a game in this kind of a style. As for other things that can relate this game a lot more to a Souls-like, you have a limited supply of these fruits here called Juppies that you can gather to help you heal in combat, almost like Estus flasks, as well as these purple Juppies which recharges your magic gauge. Other than that, the game is a pretty simple point A to point B action-adventure platformer game that's got a little bit more depth in its gameplay than you would expect. Seriously, if this game had two things added to it, namely a reliable way to dodge that isn't just jumping around like you're a fucking kangaroo, even though in hindsight that might be what you are, and a stamina bar, I could 100% seeing this game almost being a one-to-one inspiration to Dark Souls, only this time with furries, so who knows, maybe Tor-inspired Blight, we never know. But I really enjoyed my time with Darkest Faerie too, and I do intend on beating this game maybe on a stream, so why not let me know in the comments down below. I yearn for engagement and a high chat record. But with all of that out of the way, the Darkest Faerie probably gets a 7 out of 10 in terms of similarities to Dark Souls. Now, ladies and longs, we finally reach our final two games of this list. And let me tell you, when it comes down to what could be considered the closest thing to emulate what we have now with Souls-likes, it's gotta be these final two entries, starting with Drakan. This game absolutely came out of nowhere, and if I didn't see it on a video, I would have probably never added it to this list, much like Shinobido. But it's got it, everybody. It's got a lock-on system, a dodge roll, sadly no stamina bar, but it's already got two of the fundamentals down. It's got an inventory system, different kinds of stats that you can level up, the wobbly camera that you can play with in the pause menu, an open world you get to explore, dropping trees on goblins, satisfying combat against the enemies, limited healing items, both long and short ranged weapons that can be acquired from shops. This is without a doubt one of the most obscure games on this list, but this game was way too scary with how close it comes to the Souls-likes that we have nowadays. It's really insane. Whilst I don't really think so far that this game has got the difficulty down from the short time that I've played it, that doesn't really matter because this game, aside from its atmosphere and stuff like that, is almost practically one-to-one with what modern Souls-likes have. And let me tell you, I want to jump into this one again to shine a little bit of light on this forgotten gem that practically is the original Souls-like that we have nowadays, almost an entire decade prior. But there does exist one game that inches this one out ever so slightly, but for basically how one-to-one Drakan is, it gets a 9 out of 10 in terms of its similarity to a Souls-like. Here we are, everyone. This is the game that served as the catalyst to this entire video. After playing a few hours of Blades of Darkness, I can confidently say that if there was a game that scarily did every single thing we know Souls-likes for today, it would 100% be this game. Severance's Blade of Darkness, or just Blade of Darkness if you're playing the modern remaster, is a game with a grimdark atmosphere, various different classes that each specialize in their own unique weapons, a lock-on system, a dodge mechanic, combat that overall favors taking your time, parrying, and knowing when you can lob an enemy's head off with a precisely aimed strike, the fucking stamina bar that needs time to recharge after you attack in order to not get your shit rocked because the roids this guy must be taking is starting to have an effect on your lungs and you can't do much without going into asthma. Various different items that you can find like weapons, armor, and healing items, some of which you can keep on reserve like the Estus flasks in Dark Souls. Blade of Darkness is what I'm talking about when it comes down to how scary it is, how closely this game does what From Software would make famous in just 8 short years from this game's release. Hell, it even does torch lighting as well, so you can navigate darker environments much like Dark Souls 2. Blade of Darkness invented torches in video games, and I'm pretty convinced that's why this game got a modern-day remaster, which I 100% recommend, by the way, because they probably saw how popular the Souls games became and then just decided, hey Junior, know where you came from. It's so prevalent to the fact of how close this game is to Dark Souls that even news articles nowadays are also retrospectively wondering if Blade of Darkness had any hand in inspiring this revolutionary genre. But from what I've played personally, even if it didn't directly inspire Dark Souls, Blade of Darkness is probably the scariestly close game that we're gonna get to a Dark Souls game before the Souls-like genre was even a thought. So with that, Blade of Darkness gets a 9.5 out of 10 in terms of scary similarities. So yeah, with all of that out of the way, thank you guys so much once again for making it all the way to the end of this pretty damn long video. This is the kind of stuff I really want to put more time and more effort and more of my energy into making, because this was really a fun video to make. And I hope I made you guys realize something, that maybe FromSoft, they weren't really the people who originated the genre we all hold so near and dear to us today. But with all of that being said, my name is John from the channel with the freakishly long name. If you guys enjoyed watching this video, I hope so, that would make me sad if you didn't, then please consider leaving a like and subscribing to this channel. And if you once again want to help support this channel in any way, shape or form, then you can do that by joining the Patreon or becoming a channel member. And with all of that being said, I want to give a massive shout out to all the channel members and top tier Patreon supporters, Mr. Afton Boy, Eric, as well as my brother RWSJ Productions. So yeah, thank you guys all so much. Hopefully I'll see you guys in the future with a kind of video like this again. But until then, have yourselves an amazing day, and I will see you guys next time. Goodbye!